Zugelder, who the current Gunnison Library is named after, was born in Monroe County, Iowa on December 18, 1901. Anne was an author, historian, taught both public and college classes in the Gunnison area, while also volunteering with numbers of charitable organizations. She considered the time she spent in helping to secure a credible library system for Gunnison as her greatest contribution, which the Gunnison Public Library building was later dedicated to Anne in 1985.
I worked with Ann Zugelder on the library board when the present library was built, that we were doing the fundraising when I was on the board, and learned a lot about people and libraries. Ann Zugelder is one of the most incredible ladies I've ever met. She didn't have an easy life, but she accepted her life and made it much better because of her own intuitive and work ethic and desire to make things always better. A really neat lady. She was married and she and her husband had no children. She taught for many, many years up at the Western State College. At the time they had a room where you could watch the teacher and the student and they could see how teaching should be done, and she really was an expert at that. When she retired, why then she went into all kinds of things like the library. They had a scholarship fund that she was the chairman of the board on. It was the Margaret White O'Leary Fund that served scholarships for young ladies, and at that time that was something that wasn't done very prevalently.
So there's a long history of library service in Gunnison County, going back to 1937 when the American Association of University Women banded together to create a library and fund a library that existed in the basement of Webster Hall. It really wasn't until 1965 that Gunnison County, the commissioners at that time, began putting property tax funds into library service, and it took another decade to build a library building and move out of the basement of Webster Hall in Gunnison. And that was really, and really still is, the cornerstone of library service, is the support of the Gunnison County Commissioners.
The basement of Webster Hall is where she started the first library in Gunnison. I do to this day have a couple of the bookshelves that she built for the library in the basement of Webster Hall. She did everything. She felt libraries were extremely important, and so she not only put her heart and mind into it, but she put just physical labor into it. But she could see that Webster Hall was no longer big enough, and so she would attend every county commissioner, city council, any governmental agency in the Gunnison Valley to promote building a library.
She was instrumental in the acquisition of a $54,000 and a $20,000 federal grant, while also spearheading local fund drive efforts nearing $45,000.
I believe it took us about 2 years, maybe 2.5, to raise the money. She was a dynamo, and she had a mission, and she was going to succeed, and she did.
Another driving force of the library system was Bonnie Burrill.
I took over as the librarian when Ann Zugelder decided she didn't want to do that particular job. I truly enjoyed it, and the particular gift I had was organization. You needed to keep things such as the books in an organized manner, and I taught young children how to use the library, and I truly enjoyed that, and I truly enjoyed the reading program. I read to children from other books a lot. That was my one gift to be able to do. We changed somewhat from a children's library to an all-purpose library, and that was important.
The collection, with the help of Bonnie Burrell, the county librarian at the time, was brought way up to speed, equivalent to a proper community library. Not to mention that community groups would come in, there would be speakers, there would be people that would meet to have book discussions. There's the Socrates Cafe today. They have yoga classes in there, yoga and books it's called. It's really cute. So many things that have enhanced not only our community but library users.
We encouraged all ages and beliefs to use the library, and that was an important part of it for me anyway.
With the help of local contributions, federal grants, many volunteer hours, and perseverance by the Board of Trustees, the dream of a new, larger Gunnison Public Library came to be. Over 10,000 volumes had to be transferred to the new 15,000 volume building from the old Webster Hall location by 53 volunteers from various service area organizations.
It was quite an undertaking to move the library totally. Every single book had to be indicated. We had boxes everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean that because we were not a large library. I'm not even sure if I remember the number of books that we had at that time when we moved.
The new 3,000 square foot structure was designed by Cabell, Childress, and Richard Ansoldi of Childress and Associates of Denver. This tumbled brick and cedar building was constructed in less than a year by Gary Sterrett Construction Incorporated of Gunnison, with the interior decorations done by Sally Mason of Denver.
Well, when I moved to Crested Butte in 1977, there was a library there continuously, but it was very, very limited. It was located in the railroad depot in 2 little rooms, and it was had very limited hours and a very limited collection. It was more donated books, a lot of children's books.
You know, I remember my mother volunteering at the first library, and that library was in the depot in the 80s.
But if you needed more extensive collection, was the Gunnison main branch was where you would go. It was bigger, there was more staff, you could get more help, and it was a good collection of all kinds of subjects.
The depot closed in 1954. This building became the house of the most recent station master. And he kept it until around the 1970s, the early 70s, when it was time for him to move out of Crested Butte and go south. Because the depot was for sale, there was a couple of ideas that were going around. And one was to purchase it so it could become condominiums for residences. At that time, there was a man named Ralph and his wife, Billy Clark, and they loved this building. They were also philanthropic and did a lot of really terrific things for the valley and for the town of Crested Butte. They couldn't stand the idea of this building becoming just a condominium and being changed. So they purchased the building on their own. They were also part of the Crested Butte Society, gatekeepers for Crested Butte. They cared about arts and they also cared about the historic preservation because the town had become a National Historic District in 1974. At that time, during this period of time, this building that used to be the passenger waiting room then became the location of the local museum. Another aspect of this room was also a library. So there was a period of time after it was used as a museum where this building became the town library. It housed bookshelves in both of these offices, and there's actually still a book drop in this door, and it's been maintained because it's one of the uses that was really important to Crested Butte in this mid-time history.
We never had a great, huge amount of money to spend on books, and they're quite expensive. So we rotated from Gunnison to Crested Butte. Crested Butte we saw as our branch library.
You know, time went on. In the early 90s, in 1992 in fact, a real collaborative effort happened with Mount Crested Butte, the town of Crested Butte, Gunnison County, and Gunnison Watershed School District to expand library service. There was some grant money from the state involved, and they remodeled the Old Rock School into the Old Rock Library in Crested Butte. And that was a huge expansion of library services into the north end of the valley. And that has maintained as our two physical library spaces. We have a lot of information that's downloadable online and available from anywhere in the world, certainly the remote parts of the county.
I'm Nan Lum, and I was the president of the Committee to Restore the Rock School to be used as a public library in Crested Butte, and I was also the project coordinator through the restoration project until it was completed in 1993. If you wanted something in Crested Butte, as I said earlier, you had to have an imagination, and it brought the community members together to work together to create what they wanted. And the K through 8 grades were housed in what is now the town offices. And we had a nominal library in that building, and one day I was in the school library and looking across the way, and here's the Old Rock building, and it was so sad. The bell tower was about ready to collapse, and it was just being used as a storage center for the Gunnison School District at the time. I approached the town with an idea to turn it into a public library, and it sort of evolved from there. We got a committee, and there were about 5 of us. It was Bill and Evie Roseberry and Stephen and Sandra Rudy and me. And we started out to turn this beautiful building into what you see it today.
Let's take a look back in history at this classic old building. Superintendent of Schools of Gunnison County, G.B. Spratt, who began his term in 1881 with only one schoolhouse in the Gunnison territory. By 1883, he had constructed over 12 schoolhouses in the area, and construction of the Crested Butte School had begun on a stone and brick school that would cost nearly $6,000 to build and furnish. The stone came from the same quarry at the end of Elk Avenue, where the same rock was used for the Crested Butte coke ovens.
I am currently working on a document chronicling Fred Zugelder's work here in Gunnison, starting with when he came here in 1880 and the various quarries that he developed and the various buildings that he built, kind of a history of what went on. He started with a contractor by the name of T.G. Russell. It was Russell and Zugelder. They built they did the foundation and built a Levita Hotel. They worked on the Willard House, and they built the Old Rock Schoolhouse in Crested Butte.
Completed November of 1883, classes began with 36 students, the lower grades in the frame structure schoolhouse to the east of the building, and the upper classes using the new rock schoolhouse. It would be on June 27, 1910, when the town voted a $13,000 bond for a new brick school that was constructed by the Marble Brothers and was completed in 1911. Crested Butte citizens saw a need for an extension of its class load, so April 30th, 1927, the school board and voters approved the building of a new school. John J. Huddart of Denver, Colorado was the architect, and Peterman and Cooper of Greeley, Colorado won the contract to act as general contractors. The new high school was opened for classes 6 weeks into the 1927 school year when they moved out of the Old Rock Schoolhouse.
Well, the first thing we had to do was raise the funds. We had just completed the Art Center about 6 months earlier. The people that were organized the renovation of the Center for the Arts were very informative on how to go about this. So we contacted them and got an idea. And, well, we were fortunate right out of the chute. We received an Energy Impact Assistance Grant, which I believe was a federal grant. For $75,000, we had already started our private fundraising, and we were taking donations as small as $10. So that was going to take a while. But we got this grant to get going, and we needed it because the structural integrity of the building was in dire straits. The bell tower needed to be straightened. It had been hit by lightning 10 years before, and it was threatened with having the bell tower collapse. They had to strengthen and reinforce the foundation. Just a lot of things that you don't really see in a project of this scale. The building was sort of in disrepair. We had grants, a total of 5 grants to complete this project. In addition to the Energy Impact Assistance Grant, Bonnie Burrell was successful in securing 3 grants that paid for the elevator, because it's a 2-story building, became handicapped accessible that way, and books. There were very few new books from the library we were in. I start off by telling you that the entire project, which was completed again in 1993, cost just about $341,000. The percent of private contributions to this project was about 40%. Grants totaled 40%. The 2 towns, Crested Butte and Mount Crested Butte, donated 18% of the cost of the project. Gunnison County RE1J School District and Gunnison County contributed 1% each, for a total of 2% to the entire cost of this project. From the railroad depot, that were 2 little rooms and mostly donated books, we went to a full-service library serving the entire community, the school children, the town of Crested Butte, and the public. It had a full staff. It had interlibrary loan. It was wired for computers, and that was the 80s, where one of the members of our group that restored the building had the foresight to wire the building for computers. And boy, that was amazing. And somebody told me that Governor Roy Romer, governor of Colorado at the time, was going to be in Crested Butte during the dates of our dedications, and we contacted the governor's office and asked would he be so kind as to come over and cut the ribbons at our opening of the Old Rock Library. He said he'd be delighted. So he came over in his signature leather bomber jacket. We had the scissors, and we needed someone, a child, to come and help the governor cut that ribbon. And up from the audience was Lily Eskew, a grade schooler at the time, cute as could be, very big reader and library user, and she helped the governor cut the ribbon. And then I had the honor of bringing him inside and showing him around, and he's looking around and sort of liked what he saw and sort of said, how much did this cost? How much did this set you back? I think is his exact words. And I told him, I said, you got quite a deal here. When you see the work and the donations and all of the accoutrements that went into this, really a labor of love for the community. That I'd go over there and shovel the snow before the subs got there. So many of them were helping us and not charging us because they knew we had a very limited budget. Scott Wimmer did all the bookshelves, and he was a boat builder before he came to Crested Butte, so he did very fine woodworking, and he took great pride in those shelves, and he built them. Betty Barkman did all this beautiful stained glass. If you notice the transom windows and the glass on the entrance to the on each entry door, she did that. Danny Byron, a local a woodworker, did the custom tables in the rock school. They're square and you can put them together. They're just beautiful. Gary Schaefer did all the masonry on the rock, which was so important because it's the sandstone that was quarried at the west end of Elk Avenue when there was a sandstone quarry there. As I mentioned earlier, one of the grants we got was from the state of Colorado Historic Preservation. It was their very first time in issuing these grants, and I remember writing it with Evelyn Roseberry on the Rock School Committee. And we spent a great deal of time writing it, and we requested $45,000. We got $33,600, and we were delighted. But it was towards the end of the project, and we diligently provided all the documentation that the state needed in order to issue funds to pay the contractors. But they didn't have a director who knew who had experience, let's say, and it took forever for them to pay. They were running about 8 weeks or more behind, and it was so bad that we had to shut the job down, which is never a good thing. So I went to the Crested Butte State Bank as a private citizen and borrowed $20,000 on my own signature. Back then, banks were privately owned, and we could do this, and it was kind of the bank, and the bank just said, "Nan, just keep fundraising, you'll get the job done." So, but it was kind of unnerving to have to take out $20,000 to finish a project like this, but I did. And very fortunately, a gentleman by the name of Robert Hawk and his wife Sis from Texas, who owned a home in Mount Crested Butte, stepped forward and gave the Committee to Restore the Rock School stock certificates from the spaghetti warehouse chain that they founded, and that totaled $21,087. So I was able to pay back the bank, and the remaining funds I wrote a check to the Crested Butte Friends of the Library, who had formed after the building was finished and occupied. Well, it seems like the town of Crested Butte providing the building and the Gunnison County Library Board providing the expertise has enhanced the Old Rock Library immensely, and they've worked very well to have the hours they have and the staff they have, and they maintain it very, I notice that they maintain it very well.
We have a wonderful group of patrons to help in the Gunnison Valley. Crested Butte is full of people who are interested in new things, and many of whom need help finding information about either new things or things that they are passionate about, from art to foreign language to history. I mean, it's just all over the place. And so the circulation desk at the Crested Butte Library is so much of a reference librarian position because you're asked every question you could imagine, and it's good detective work to try to help people figure out what they need, and it's very possible with the resources we have.
I always thought a library as being pretty static, and nothing new coming in. But this experience that I've had with shelving books has taught me that the books don't even stay the same. They just are constantly changing with the sharing program that I'm sure they have with the other libraries.
I use libraries a lot. As a prof, I also would do a lot of work in libraries over the years, and when I wrote this book, I had to do archival research. Today with Google, you can't quite say they're the only storehouse of knowledge in society, but they are certainly the deepest.
So this fall, November the 5th, 2019, Gunnison County Library District is asking a question on the ballot to fund services, operations, programming, and collections. So right now, the library district has no source of sustainable funding. Our libraries could be defunded at any time. This question will, number one, solve that situation to where we do have sustainable funding for library services in Gunnison County. If the question passes, we will expand collections, expand programs, expand services. We'll add a whole suite of services for young adults. We will grow our children's programming and early literacy programming. We will be able to double the amount of electronic downloadable content that's available, and we'll be able to add a third more to our physical collections each year. So it'll be a much nicer public library experience for our community, and it will be sustainable.
Sir, I want to confirm that libraries now are not just places where you read. They're places where you learn, they're places where you grow, they're places where the community comes together, and there's so much more that a library does than just a place for books.